Hello, everyone. We're waiting for people to be joining us from the waiting room as they flow in here. We're just going to get started with a couple of housekeeping items. We're excited to welcome you to our August webinar on goal-centered communication. First, a couple of housekeeping. We do have the Q&A enabled, and we have it set up so that you can see each other's questions, just as a chat would be, but you have the ability to remain anonymous if you so choose. So we're going to be asking some questions. We would love for this to be as interactive as possible and engage with you throughout the webinar today. I'm Shelley Taylor here with Jonathan Magidovitch. He is joining us from Israel. You can see it's dark where he is. I have a background on my screen. It's light where I am. I'm in Pittsburgh. And this is the, I think, fourth in our webinar series as the new Aspen Family Business Group. We rolled out as a nonprofit at the beginning of this year, and we're really excited to share a lot of content with you, both through these live events and on our website and through Sam, our conversational AI coach. So we are going to get started here. Jonathan, just hello there.
Hi.
And
great to see you.
Good to see you. Our goal today is to talk about communication, provide you with a toolkit so that you really are set up for conversations of any sort. And we hear all the time, communication sometimes is the toughest thing, right? And why is that? Well, when you arm yourself with some tools and some skills and little planning ahead of time, maybe it doesn't have to be so difficult. So as I said, we're going to engage with you. I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan and get going.
Thank you, Shelley. So glad everyone of you were able to join us. And we're going to start with one of those engagements that Shelley Taylor just spoke about. And the point of these engagements is that they support your learning, your taking in of new information by your being active as you take it in. So we have a pre-test, not really a test, and a post, the same pair of questions at the beginning and at the end. So what we're going to ask you to do, I'll read out the questions. You'll see the Q&A, and we would love for you to put a response into the Q&A, and then we'll be interacting around those, now and throughout. So here are the questions for the Q&A for you. What comes to mind when you think of good communication, and or what comes to mind when you think of bad communication? Go for it.
And you can think about that. If you think about it in your head, put it in the Q&A, whatever's most comfortable for you. But we do want you to spend a little time thinking about what that means to you. And we'll get into that a little further. You'll hear our definitions of that.
Yeah. Only when you think it's been enough time.
Yeah, I think we're ready to move on.
You think we're good? So what is communication and what is good or bad communication? And that's going to take us to our next slide. Communication, a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, and behaviors. It's daunting to think about it. And we're always processing enormous amounts of information, but there are tools that allow us to do that more intentionally and in a goal-oriented way, and that's what we're bringing forward today. Mostly we're going to be talking about verbal communication, but non-verbal communication is, of course, very powerful. Body language, tone of voice, everything, what we wear, what we put on our faces, all of this kind of stuff is communication. Let's continue now with our next slide, and I'm going to move it over to you, Shelley.
Okay, sounds good. So, this sounds maybe kind of obvious, but really think ahead of time. What is your goal? What's your objective in the conversation? What's the message that you want to get across? Who needs to hear the message? And then also think about, this is more setting the stage, we'll talk about a little bit, but where is it going to happen? But then also why, right? So what's important about this message and who I want to communicate it with. So think about, this is where we want you to do a little thinking on your own here as well. Think about a recent communication that you had with someone in your family or someone in your business. And just think about that for a minute so everyone has something in mind. And maybe now you can throw it into the chat. Go ahead of time. Did you know what your goal was going into the communication? Just a quick yes or no. And remember, you can be anonymous in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A. Did you know what your goal was? Did you achieve your goal? Quick yes or no. And then what could the outcome have been? Could it have been different knowing your goal going in versus not knowing your goal? Do you think the outcome might have been different? So also another just quick yes or no there. As we move to the next slide, Jonathan, do you want to make a note about the images that we've used here in the slideshow?
They're AI created, and they're a little odd. We're trying to give you some imagery to help focus your thinking, and we want to be careful about copyright and all that. So enjoy the images.
And you'll see we have some interesting ones coming up too. If you haven't enjoyed them yet, you might enjoy them more coming up. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to talk about setting the stage a little bit. So what does that mean? Who's going to be involved? We need to have a physical environment. Is it going to be on-site? Is it going to be off-site? Do we want to do it virtually or do we need to do it in person? And then who are we inviting? Maybe there are people who are central to the conversation. Maybe there are other people who need to be in the room just to hear what's going on. Some of you may recall in an earlier webinar, if you were able to attend that or have seen some of our materials, we talk about decision-making matrices, and we talk about who's involved in a decision and then also who needs to be informed. So sometimes you can have those people in the room with you, and that might streamline that communication as well, as long as everyone understands what their roles are in that communication. And then the development, this is part of the goal, right? What's your agenda? What do you want to cover? Some people really don't like surprises. I, in fact, myself have had people say, well, if we're going to have a meeting, you need to send me the agenda ahead of time. So I'm like, okay, I'll send you the agenda ahead of time. And so being clear, that helps you frame your goals, right? That helps you know exactly what you want to share and discuss. And then it lets the other parties prepare if they need to or want to. The agenda can be informal. It doesn't need to be, super long, super detailed. It could just be an intention. But the idea is everyone is knowing ahead of time and knowing going into the meeting what the plan is. So maybe, Jonathan, do we want to talk about examples of physical space that might enhance or take away from a meeting and how people can be mindful of those things?
Absolutely want to talk about that. And the number one across the board and for decades now space issue is if the space is the wrong temperature, you can't have good meetings in it. You can't have good communications in it. So deal with that. Things like that. What do you
Right. How many of us have been in a room where it's too cold or too hot, right? We all know about that. And we talk about lighting. What's the table setup going to be? Is there noise going on, right? Ambient noise from another room. And that's part of the consideration of, do you want to do something on-site or off-site, right? Who might be on the other side of the door? Who might be able to be around or hear what's going on? People should feel comfortable talking about whatever's on their mind without being concerned that they're going to be overheard. Jonathan, I think we want to talk a little bit about, spontaneous or unplanned conversations as well.
Yeah, so staying with this slide, everything that we're talking about and much of what we're talking about in our toolkit here are things that you do in advance, that you have time for, you can prepare for ahead of the communication. And that is a good thing to do, to try and have most of your communications that are essential or key with pre-planning, especially if we're working on our communication to improve it, especially in, if in our family business, we have a history of maybe not the best communication, that we do want to give ourselves the opportunity to prepare. However, many communications, happen unplanned and spontaneous, and they're great. They happen in the aisles of the supermarket. They, at a sport venue where you've just bumped into each other. And those are powerful and they're important. And as we work on our communication skills, we get faster and better at it and handle those better as well. What I would say is if you're feeling confident, go for it. If it's happening and you don't have a choice, take your time to breathe deeply and get yourself through it. But generally focus, as we're working to develop our skill sets, on things that you can do in advance to prepare for better communication. There are things that include self-calming. More on this in a minute. Preparing scripts for ourselves, jotting a little note or a few words or a key phrase can be helpful. Absolutely, as Shelley has already shared, an agenda, it's almost a fair play kind of thing to let other people know what's on your mind and to let them have a space in creating the agenda, bringing people together, but doing it in advance. In our next slide, this is internal. Now, by the way, this is one of the funny pictures, or in my odd pictures. I'm saying that we do need to do a self-check, and I asked for a picture of people taking their pulse, and I very literally got that. That's not necessarily what I'm asking you to do, but I am asking you to do a biological check. Are you feeling physically comfortable? Are you hungry? Are you tired? Be aware of those things. Being aware of them isn't going to take them away. It's going to give them space so that you can deal with that. You can acknowledge it inside yourself and then just work around it, live with it and speak with it and communicate with it with others. Another internal is an emotional check. And am I happy? Am I sad? Am I calm or am I anxious? Is that getting into my speech pattern? Am I speaking too quickly because of maybe anxiety or something like that? So a self-check on emotions. And I'm going to admit to you that several colleagues of mine hired a coach and we were working on ourselves. And she would begin every session by asking us, how are you feeling? And the voice in my head would say, how am I supposed to know that? My wife knew. She was in our group with us instantly. For me, it was a matter of practice and training. So for anyone who's like me, what I'm saying is you can develop these skills. These are skills that are things that we can grow. So a bio check, an emotional check, a conceptual self-check is a different way of prepping for communication. A question for that would be, what am I bringing that is related to the agenda of this meeting? Or what am I bringing that's unrelated? Do I have somebody else's meeting on my mind while I'm in this meeting? Makes it a little confusing, or can. Do I have unique information? Do I hold unsubstantiated beliefs about the items here? Do I have a clear goal for the communication? These are helpful for us in getting ourselves placed.
Yeah, Jonathan, if I could jump in, I think this is really an important point. I know when I work with clients, and that's obviously a different kind of communication setup because I'm facilitating a meeting, but I'll often start by asking if everyone, if people have things that are holding them back from being full participants, or if they have things that are going to interfere with the way they want to show up and be present in the meeting. And I've also heard said that I can't remember what the number is, but I'm going to say 5. Like everyone who shows up to work brings 5 other people with them, whether it's the kids at home, whether it's mom, across the country or whatever, so we always have all this stuff. And that example is, was given in the context of showing up for work, but it's in any context, right? We've got all this other stuff going on all the time. So how do we try and really tamp that down to the, best of our ability for a particular situation or period in time?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Asking that question, being explicit about bringing people into, is there something that's getting in the way of your being present, not just in ourselves, but to go ahead and voice that. And another point here on self-check is if we're self-checking, we can also do that in the middle of a meeting, particularly if we feel ourselves getting off, or if we're feeling that the meeting is getting a little off either tone or off direction. These resets can happen during a meeting as well. So we're going to go to the next slide and talk about active listening and something that we call reverse active listening.
And Jonathan, maybe we should pause and just note that we have some nice comments in the Q&A that we asked for the engagement. Yeah. So thank you, all of you who've been chiming in there. And I like, we're going to be getting to this. It's appropriate for this slide, the recapping of the meeting. Shelley Smith and Maya Kagan are talking about, Kogan, talking about co-creating an agenda, which is really key and great in a mentoring relationship. So I like that, Maya, thank you. But then also sort of the summary of, what did we hear? What did we both hear and what did we cover? Really important. And then Jonathan, go ahead, sorry.
We're here, since we're in the Q&A, I see that Shelley S. has talked something extremely important. Good accountability. What is said is done on both sides. And what we're talking about is one of the key elements of trust. And trust is a solid foundation for communication. So accountability is hugely important. Thank you, Shelley S.
Yes, thank you. And then to our anonymous attendee, I do want to address your question. And that's a challenging situation, whether the topic is succession or any one of a number of topics. If one person in a group or in a family sees the need for a conversation or clarity on a topic and the others are not addressing it, that's very difficult for sure. So we hear that. And I think, yes, it's important to bring it up. As simple as this is something that needs to be discussed, right? So it could be brought up in an open way without necessarily providing the answer or that you have a preconceived outcome in mind, but that it would be important for all the key stakeholders to engage in a conversation. And maybe that's a facilitated conversation, doesn't need to be with a family business consultant, can be with somebody who just is well-versed in being able to listen and, a neutral third party, I would say. Jonathan, do you have, and I guess the other thing is, what's the alternative, right? Just to leave things to chance, which, sometimes people do because it's harder to have the conversation, but the outcomes ultimately might not be as desirable or preferable.
As you said, yeah, it might not be preferable if we don't deal with stuff. So regarding bad communication, the first part of anonymous attendees' comment here, bad communication, I think it's important to remember, is still communication. And what makes it bad in this case is that things that are potential landmines or difficulties for your business are not dealt with. They don't go away. And generally, they attract other things to themselves and they grow. So yeah, bad communication. We're going to move into this slide, active listening and reverse active listening. And Shelley and I are going to do a little bit of modeling for you on this, and then we're going to bring you into it through the Q&A. So we're going to have a very brief conversation about what we like about or dislike about business meetings. Shelley, you want to start or you want me to start?
Well, I can start. I think the business meeting that is always on the calendar and everyone shows up and no one knows what it's going to be, if there's a main topic and we all have to go around the room and just give a little update, and it might be the same thing we heard last week, or it might not be relevant to us, and there's really no focus, and then the hour's up and we haven't accomplished anything. I'm going to add a couple of things that I'm not loving about business meetings and that I do love. I love solutions-centered conversations in business meetings versus blaming, trying to figure out who did what that made things so bad. And this is very personal, the next one. I prefer to meet and then eat and not to meet and eat at the same time.
I don't do those two things together very well.
Jonathan, what
Yeah.
I hear you saying is that you prefer to not have food at the same time as having a business meeting. You're not comfortable with that arrangement. Prefer to separate the two. Is that right?
I think you heard me very well, and I'm grateful and I respect and appreciate that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And did you,
So I was clear as mud. Apparently I was not clear as mud, but in fact clear. Yeah.
you were clear. Yes, you were clear. Yes.
Okay.
And then, what did you hear? Am I clear? Did you hear what I shared? I don't think my example was great, but what did you hear from me, Jonathan?
Heard absolutely nothing because in my head there is so much going on. I only heard my own voices. Would you be willing to repeat what you said, or at least some key part?
Yes, Jonathan, thank you for acknowledging that you didn't capture all that I said. I was
Yeah.
actually talking about group meetings where they're always on the calendar and there's no real objective and people go around and give little updates, but they don't really further the cause, I guess. I think it's important for everyone to know what's going on in the different departments or the different areas, but sometimes that could be handled in a more efficient manner. I feel when we get together, our time is so valuable that we should be focused on creating solutions together and new opportunities.
Thank you. I believe I got it. And I'm not going to give a recap of it, but take it to this way. I think I'm hearing some common ground between the two of us, and I want to check in with you about that. It seems like we like positive meetings, and it seems like we like efficient meetings. Those are some key points. Yes.
Yes, yes, I agree. Yes. So that was our modeling.
Yeah.
And I want to say that it takes practice. Sometimes whether you've heard previously about the active listening or the paraphrasing, it can feel awkward, it can feel forced, but the more you do it, the more natural it becomes and the more fluid it can feel. And if you practice it enough or do it enough, people don't actually realize that you're doing it. They just view it as a really great person to have a conversation with because they're checking in and they're really listening to you. And I did want to share actually why listening is so important. I think we're all aware of that, but some statistics that I've come across over the years that how much do we tend to recall immediately after someone has said it? And that's about 50%, which is not a whole lot. And then how much do we remember maybe 2 to 5 days later? About 20%. So the active listening and the paraphrasing, just as Jonathan mentioned at the top of the hour, putting things in the Q&A can help engage and cement some of the concepts. Similarly, with the paraphrasing and the active listening, it's a powerful tool to help you really hone in on what's going on and capture some of it for the future.
Shelley, I'm going to underscore what you said about this can seem awkward, and it can seem awkward, and it does get somewhat less awkward with practice. But awkward is a good thing. What we're doing, in fact, when we're trying to change any behavior, so this is a behavior change model that we're working on. What we have to do is we have to stop the habits, stop the stuff that we're used to doing, maybe not even consciously aware that we're doing it in our communication. And in order to stop it, what we're doing is we're replacing it with other things. And it is awkward until those become second nature. And it's worth it.
Yeah, well said.
So Shelley and I have been going back and forth for a couple of minutes on active listening and reverse active listening. You all have the Q&A. Give us some active listening. What have you heard? And we'll check in with that later.
Okay, so we can move on to the next. And now we're going to talk about when good communication is bad and start with when good communication is bad. So we referred to some of these things before when we're talking about setting up your environment. And so even with the best agenda, you got all the right people there, you've prepared yourself, you know what your goals are, but then, here, look, the sprinkler goes off, right? Or the temperature in the room isn't good, or people are showing up late to the meeting or leaving early, or people are having their phones out, clearly distracted, right? So even though your intention and even though you've set up everything, it doesn't really go as planned. You can also have the situation where the listening isn't great, right? So you've set yourself up, you've done all the things, you've got all the right people in the room, temperature's great, but it's just not processing for whatever reason among the people in the room. And that can be a lot of reasons. It could be those 5 other people they brought with them, in their head to the meeting. It can be they're hungry, lots of other things. So setting ourselves up for success involves a lot of things that also have to come along with us, even when we've done our best preparation. Jonathan, did you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I do. Sometimes bad communication is good. And let's think about that. Let's do some examples of what that is. I think we've all been in situations where we have been in communication and we feel it going off the rails, not in a good way. So when the result of the current communication looks like it's going to lead to unwise or dangerous actions, how do we pause that conversation that's going off the rails? Normally, in good communication, you would not try to shut down a communication. Certainly not somebody else's. Internally, of course, you would. And let's go back to Robert's Rules of Order for just, I think, a broadly understood and recognized set of tools for shutting down communication. There's a veto the chairperson could exercise. There could be a vote to table a discussion. And Robert's Rules is very clear about that. If you can get your family business community to follow Robert's Rules, table motion, it's tabled, you stop talking, you move on to something else. Less formally, you can say, hey, let's take a bio break. Everyone gets up and does whatever they need to do. Or let's take a minute to review our values, mission, and vision. We spoke, I think, was it 2 webinar months ago that we spoke about values, vision, mission. And if we're getting off track, we probably are straying from our values, maybe from our mission. It's not a bad idea to go back to it. It can seem remarkably stiff and formal to do that, but formality can save us. Remember, we're in a section where we're trying to prevent potentially dangerous or damaging communication, words that might get said that can't get taken back easily. So that recommendation is have in your meeting room around your business, your place of business, have posters up of your values and your mission and your vision. They're not a joke. They're very, very serious. So that is another tool. Go back to those. My sister has one that's very different. She stands up and screams, after the bathtub's overflowing and runs out of the room. It works. There are other things that we can do. In family businesses, we wear different hats. We wear a hat of owner. We wear a hat of sometimes we're an employee in the company, a manager or an executive on the board. Those different hats each have different ways of communicating, different subjects of communication. And if we're having a communication problem, one of the things to consider is, are we wearing the right hat? Make sure that we're wearing the right hat and speak in that way. I don't want to catch you off guard, Shelley, but there's a story that you have about raise the flag that's on this topic. Would you share?
Yeah, I would love to share it. And before I do that, I just want to point out, when we talk about, I think maybe when good communication is bad is an easier concept to grasp than when bad communication is good. And I think the message we're trying to convey here is that there can be a challenge, any one of a number of things that Jonathan just referred to, but how you deal with that challenge and how you bring it back to the important nature or topic or roles or who's involved, that kind of thing, then it becomes good because it creates the opportunity to really focus in and move past the challenging, the bad. And so this example actually will help with that also. I was working with a client family and they wanted to know, what do they do when things get heated? You know, how to stop the conversation so that the yelling doesn't start, or so that they can be productive. And so they wanted to have a code, and they called it raise the flag. And then they said, okay, what's that going to be? And they came up with a code word that was meaningful to all of them. So that was good. That was step one. But then they said, okay, but then what? There's got to be a follow-up and a follow-through. So this was all worked out by them in the presence of me. It was great. And I love it because I get to use this example too. Raise the flag, you know, so the conversation stops, but then it's the responsibility of the person who raised the flag to come back. You know, whoever felt it was getting too heated, you know, you've got a 24-hour period. You need to calm down and then come back and re-engage. So it's not okay. And I see we have an item in the Q&A, which we'll get to, about cutoff, right? So
Yes.
that's something
Yes.
that often happens. People just don't want to deal with it. And so they just walk away and don't deal with it. But I thought it was remarkable when this family came up with that, the next step, right? We need to then come back and have that conversation when we're feeling a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah. So Shelley, we do have another or the same anonymous attendee who's got something that we should bring in here. And it is a fear that inside a family system where people do cut each other off and they go through periods of no communication around sensitive topics, that can usually be the precipitant. It sounds, this person writes, it sounds as if setting up a more formal structure could be a way forward. Absolutely. That is so on target. Here, you've got very emotional, very human, and very difficult communication among people that often descends into being about the people, about the emotions, rather than solutions. Structure, like we've been talking about, have meeting rooms, set the meeting room temperature properly, put your values chart on the wall. Structure, use Robert's Rules of Order or some kind of meeting process. Structure, especially structure that your family business has built together so people have ownership of it, they agree on it, that takes it out of the personal. Protect the structure. Use the structure to create a space for talking with, being with the people that you need, want to be with, need and want and must be with. That structure is what you need to create. And that is what we're talking.
And I think, you know, and some of the things that we talked about earlier, having the goal and communicating that ahead of time, but also having the opportunity to take a time out, letting everybody know that, you know, if tempers get heated or if we're going off track, let's pause, because we want this to be productive. We don't want this to turn into a negative or to perpetuate, you know, something negative that's been going on. So how can we flip it and really focus on the positive and working together here? And pause if we need to and take a break.
Yeah, right. Yeah, count 3 to 3, take a deep breath, something like that. It's very helpful.
Okay, are we ready for the next slide?
I think that we're ready for effective change. I shared when Shelley and I were demonstrating getting ready for active and listening, and that I like meetings that are efficient and respectful and don't have blame as part of their character. It is effective change in communication. It is so tempting to say you always, you know, you, and starting with you, as opposed to starting looking inside. And what we're talking about is, first, do the you work, do the inside yourself work. Work on your own communication skills. If you do that, things are going to change in front of the other people that you have communication issues with. And people are 100% going to respond to those changes. They may say, you're sounding pretty stiff, awkward, or silly. I don't want to do what you're telling us to do. They may fight back at first. Just thank them internally. Go with it, but work on yourself and work on what you're putting out. You will see changes. When you start seeing those changes, people can address them. What just happened then? Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciated that. And I feel like it got us, you might say, from here to here. Give real positive feedback when you see people respond to changes that you've made. But start with yourself. You end
And
up being able to work with each other. Yes, Shelley?
yeah, no, I was just going to, before we move to the next slide, just check in. Shelley Smith had a nice comment that about just making sure that to be heard, right? And to check in with each other, and that repetition and clarity is super important during conversations. And I couldn't agree more with that. Also want to, if anyone has additional questions they want to throw in, we're wrapping up our slides, but we're happy to continue to engage and have a conversation between us that you can all listen to. But we have one or two more slides here to go, but happy to answer more questions if you have them. So yes, working with us, and we have a nice our communication toolkit, all the things that we've been sharing, and here in the nice list. So, where do we want to focus on our efforts? If we focus on ourselves, bringing, what we're bringing to the communications, we're going to have better results. And as Jonathan just mentioned, changes in ourselves in our communication practices can also bring about positive changes in others. If we have our goals and we know what we're going in with and what we want to accomplish, much more productive. And it's great. We're not saying that every conversation has to have an agenda and everything has to, you have to have a goal for everything. There's great value in spontaneous conversation. I think these are more, some of these tools and tips are for scenarios where the stakes are high and there's a lot that needs to be accomplished. When you get very practiced at it and people are really good at a lot of techniques and there's really good understanding and give and take and listening, spontaneous conversations can be just as effective and just as fruitful, especially in high trust environments. So we're not saying that everything has to be Robert's Rules of Order. That can help. The structure can help when you're going off the rails or when you really need some support. And so this is the toolkit, and we are going to happy when we will be sending out the recording of this webinar, and we'll include a nice PDF of this for you. So it's a nice takeaway of, these specific items, really just to keep them top of mind with all the other details that go along with them. And I think, Jonathan, what would you like to contribute?
What I'm gonna do now is just we're before we do the post questions that we started with, there are a couple of points that came through our conversation together just now. We're talking about good communication and bad communication. And those are judgment words. Those are value words. We're very, very keen at Aspen on the importance of regularly checking in with yourself, with your family, business peers, employees, all around what values are. Now, those values, when they inform your communication, you're more likely to have good communication, or communication that you and the people that you're with feel is good. Here's a little bit more breadth about what I'm talking about. Instead of saying good communication and bad communication, we might well have been talking about effective communication and ineffective communication. Those may sound at surface very similar. They are very different. If we're talking about communication as getting information from me to you, using language, using maybe even non-language tools, if I've gotten that over to you, I've had effective communication. But what if that effective communication is filled with, it is propaganda or filled with lies or is manipulative or is disrespectful? I could have been very good at creating effective communication that goes against maybe even my own values and yours and our businesses. Good communication aligns with good values. Bad communication isn't, it could be ineffective, but bad communication could also be extremely effective and dangerous. So when we're thinking about what we want around the boardroom table, around our management meeting tables, in our meetings, look at the values chart. Bring that kind of good to your goal. Let's do the next step. Goal for communication. Agendas for meetings. Part of my value system and share in the Q&A is part of my communication goal would very well be on topic X. What is the best wisdom of this group of people? What are the questions we ask? What do we hear to get at that in this group? That would be a communication goal that I would enjoy working with over a communication goal. I want to have this meeting with these people, and the outcome is they're going to all sign my petition for this particular. It may be good, but on a more broad level, on a more, I think, realistic level of how good businesses get better is when the communication is good in a way that is respectful of everyone's values, the mission of the group. Shelley?
Yeah,
What do you
so
think?
there's a comment, I think it's part of one of the fourfold way, be open to but not attached to outcomes. So you might have an idea going in of what you want, but be open to the other voices. And that's part of the starting from within, looking for the
Yeah.
best possible outcome, not necessarily pushing an agenda through. Definitely gets seen and received and heard by others in the group.
Yeah.
We have one more nice comment in the Q&A where it refers to in a business, doing the weekly updates via the emails, and business meetings are set up for business solving purposes. And then there's also time set aside for just connecting and networking. And that's beautiful, right? So that accomplishes all of the things that they want to be accomplishing and sets up the appropriate environment for each of those. So thank you for that comment. Did we want to, do people, given all that, do we want to see how we've been received, and maybe ask for examples of good communication gone bad, or when good communication is bad, or bad communication is good? If anyone has any thoughts of, now that we've sort of explained a lot around that, and you could just think, you don't have to type in the Q&A, but maybe that will then pull up some examples from your memory, recent or otherwise. Within generations, it's easier. Between generations, it's hard. Yeah, and that's a really good example. We often have preconceptions sometimes about the other generations, about how they view life, or about what their values are, or how they approach things. And sometimes those preconceptions can get in the way of positive communication and effective communication, or good communication, I should say. To learn from my colleague, Jonathan.
Shelley, do we have time for a story?
Sure, I think we have time for a little.
Okay. It's a communication story, and it's a friend of mine. This is going back 30-year friendship now. When I first met this person, it was in an academic environment, and she was overseeing an internship I was in. And I noticed something about the way she communicated that was different. It wasn't that she spoke slowly. She spoke, but it wasn't right one after the other. There was time that she would add of silence. And I asked her about it. And what came through was, for my friend, speaking is a unique act. When she's speaking, she's speaking. When I was speaking, she was listening. And when those silences were happening, she was thinking about what I said. She was thinking about what she was going to say. I said to her, "That's amazing." And by the way, the quality of her communication was amazing. But I said to her, "I can't do that because I actually live in a culture where letting somebody finish a sentence is probably illegal. It just doesn't happen." It is so powerful. For most of us, when someone is speaking to us, we are thinking about something else. Often we're thinking about the smart thing that we're going to say to shut them down for why they're wrong. We're not going to be like my friend. I don't even know anybody else like that. But if we can approach that a little bit, that when someone is speaking, that we do try to attend to that rather than all the other stuff.
I love that. And that's really focusing on the speaker and focusing on the words. And that's one of the things that the active listening and the paraphrasing can really encourage one to do, because instead of thinking about what I'm going to say after you've spoken, I'm really thinking and processing what you are saying so that I'm able to make sure I'm getting it right. That's very powerful. That's a great example, Jonathan. Thanks.
And if you have meetings like that, you can have an outcome of a meeting that you didn't know existed before it came in because you let it grow from the communication of the meeting.
Okay, well, that's all we have today. I think we have a final slide. Do we have a final slide up there just with our URL? Maybe we do.
Let's ask the
Okay.
questions again. Put into the chat, same questions. Want to make sure I do them exactly the same way, so I'm going back. What comes to mind when you think of good communication, and or what comes to mind when you think of bad communication? And is this different from at the beginning of our time together? So let's see what's in the chats.
And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Casey to put also in the chat to the group. We have a coffee coming up, Coffee with Leslie, August 14th. And our next webinar is on governance, and that'll be the beginning of September. And also, Casey, if you could please, one thing we need to make sure we add on our slides for the next time is familybusiness.ai, which is Sam, our conversational coach. And Sam is available 24/7 to ask your questions to, and to some of our anonymous attendees, maybe getting some tips for a meeting. Sam was built, it's an AI tool, but small language model, which means it was built only from our resources and our materials. It's not pulling from anything else out in the World Wide Web. It's Aspen materials that have been developed and created over the past almost 40 years. So we're very careful and intentional about how we set that up. And it's really simple to sign up if you haven't already been there, and you just log in once and it'll remember you. And if you have questions, if it's not working the way you want, we want you to let us know also, because this is a new product for us. We're still developing it. It's fully functional, but it's growing, and we're going to be adding more features as well. Also on our website, we'll be adding more features. There'll be a dedicated toolbox with lots of downloadable resources. In addition to that, you can find our recordings on our YouTube channel now, which is at Aspen Family Business 501c3 on YouTube. So we're building our resources as we're forging ahead with our nonprofit. And Jonathan, you did ask your question in there.
Let me hop in. For next Thursday, it's 3 p.m. Eastern, that we're calling Coffee with Leslie. And it is on the same topic. It's on communication and the beautiful things that you folks are putting into the Q&A and in the chat here. The coffee allows us open dialogue. We can see each other. So those kinds of things, if you're enjoying putting them in there, please come to us next Thursday and we'll actually be able to have live chat with each other on this same topic.
Yeah, so
So
just
it's
reach out to any of us if you want to figure out how to register for that, if you haven't gotten the notifications and want to be involved. Thank you, Casey, for putting all those great links in there. So hopefully everyone can capture those before they sign off. And wonderful spending time with you, Jonathan, and everyone else out there in
too.
webinar land.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
everyone.
being with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.